Susan Hannifin-MacNab, author and founder of the A to Z Healing Toolbox, is with us today, talking about grieving, self-care survival, and the lessons she's learned about surviving personal trauma and loss. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter, here with Helen Bauer.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. We have a great guest today.
Oh, Susan is wonderful. She is a social worker, an educator, and she has created this amazing resource guide for grievers because she's a griever. She's been there.
She knows firsthand. Susan lost her husband in a car accident abruptly when her son was just 5 years old, leaving Susan to figure out how to navigate her grief, the trauma of losing him in the accident, and also how to manage her son's grief and how they would move forward. So she's got a great insider's perspective that has given her some incredible insight and skills. So we're going to connect you with her story today. She's got lots to talk about.
So we're just going to jump right in and let her tell her story because she's got a great story and has created this amazing, amazing resource to help people like her who are grieving. So here's our interview with Susan Hannifin-MacNab. Susan, we are so honored to have you with us today. Thank you for being on the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Helen and Jerry. I really appreciate being here.
We are very interested in the work that you have been doing with the A to Z Healing Toolbox, and we're going to get to what that really is here in just a minute. But first, we want to find out more about what was it that inspired you to create this A to Z Healing Toolbox. Can you share with us your personal experience that inspired you to create this?
I will definitely share that. And I think all good sharing starts with a story. So, of course, there's a story.
Yes.
And I guess, the story really begins when I grew up here in San Diego. I grew up in a house that was full of love and stability and security. And to me, that meant that no one ever died. I had all four grandparents, my brother, my parents, my animals, lived a full life. Everything in my life here in suburbia just went along wonderfully, with the occasional bump, but nothing really traumatic or grief shaping happened in my life till I was 41. And my professor, bagpiper, surfer husband went out for a drive. We had been living overseas in Australia, and our son was 5 at the time. And we were hoping to move back to San Diego or the West Coast USA after being overseas for 7 years. So we were really trying to just come back, get rooted, get settled, and figure out our next steps. And we were here for a month, and my husband went out for a drive in the local mountains here and did not return for dinner and did not return for breakfast. So long story short, I filed a missing persons report. My father, who lives in Texas, hired a private investigator. And for 2 weeks, Brent was missing in action, which is a circumstance I always heard about over there, somewhere over there in the military or some other human family that had this way over there. And now this experience was mine. So it was very traumatic for those 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks later, I got a knock on the door from the medical examiner telling me that a nature photographer was over in this mountainous area and saw a car down in this ravine area. And that's when they recovered the car and Brent's body. And that is when I suddenly became a young widowed person with a job now to solo parent a child while both of us were grieving and traumatized. So that is the major tragic shift that happened in my life that enabled me to do the work I do now and write A to Z Healing Toolbox.
Tell me what the grief experience was like. Obviously, having 2 weeks of just unknown, and I'm sure hoping for the best, and then finding out that he had died. What did you learn about grief in that period of time that really made you, kind of sit up and say, I wasn't ready for this?
Right. It's such a great question, Jerry, because what I didn't realize at the time that Brent was missing was that was not grief, that was trauma. And when Brent died, or when they found him and I realized, okay, my husband has died, then I thought, okay, now this is grief. I didn't even realize, even though I was a social worker, I didn't realize that I was having a traumatic experience. I just thought, okay, my husband has now died and now I'm grieving. Now I'm sad. Now I'm shocked. Now I'm just isolated, all the different things. But it took quite a while for me to uncover the fact that I was actually having a trauma experience on top of a grief experience. And the flashbacks, nightmares, night sweats, all of these symptoms and reactions that were happening to my physiology and my nervous system, those were trauma experiences. But then also he had died, so I was grieving. And it took me a while to wrap my brain around, this is actually a double experience of grief and trauma. And so many of the thousands of people I work with have had that double experience of grief and trauma. But society tells us someone has died, you're grieving. And we don't talk about the trauma piece, which is why I was adamant about adding that piece to the A to Z Healing Toolbox book.
I think it's really important to note you're talking about physical effects of the trauma, which moved into grief. And, in hospice, when we're talking about caring for the whole person, and on the podcast, Jerry and I focus a lot on mind, body, and spirit. You can't sever one from the others. And when you nurture one or one is ailing, then the other two experience that same nurturing or ailing at the same time. It's interesting to note that you've identified that was part of your experience, that your physical manifestations were part of your experience.
Yes. And in the book, actually, before I even get into the 26 tools that will help others heal grief and trauma and helped my son and I, the first 2 chapters are about grief and trauma. Grief, what is it? What's the definition? And here are the 6 different ways that we can be affected spiritually, behaviorally, socially, psychologically, emotionally. I mean, I was forever changed in every way. And then there's a chapter on trauma. What are the common trauma reactions in adults? Mental, emotional, behavioral, social, and physical. So as you say, we are mind, body, spirit connected, and trauma and grief do not just affect us emotionally, right? They hit all the areas. And so I think the scientific term is hot mess. I was a hot mess for a long time in all of these areas.
So let's dig in a little bit to what's in the A to Z Healing Toolbox. So first of all, how did you come up with the name A to Z? I'm sure there's a method behind that madness.
Well, there is definitely a method behind the madness. So before I was a social worker, I was a teacher. I was an educator for years. And then I was a school social worker, and all the work I did was pretty much left brain. So things were organized. They were in binders. They had alphabetical tabs. And as I was moving around my community, looking for resources and tools to help my son and I would collect information on different therapies, sand tray therapy, somatic experiencing, cognitive behavioral therapy. I would collect information about animal therapy, equine therapy, therapy dogs. I had all this information I was collecting from various resources. And I brought all these papers home and all the notes I was taking, and I had to make some sense of it. So of course I put everything in a binder, and then I had to make more sense of it. And all of these tools became alphabetized. So A became animals. Why does that therapy dog help my son feel better? I can see it happening in that therapy room. Why is this friend's dog that I'm dog sitting helping me feel lighter and even a tiny bit happier for 2 seconds? What's the deal with animals? B, breath work. C, counseling, on and on and on.
So it sounds like the blend of your education background coupled with the social work and mix in your mad organizational skills, which I appreciate greatly. I think that there's a teacher at the heart of every social worker anyway, but
Yes.
I think that's a great blend. And I also think that when someone is grieving, the simplicity of something that's ingrained in you, the way you know an alphabet, right? We are taught that when we are a little bitty, we sing the song to go with it. I think that type of organized simplicity makes it easier for a griever to attach, to immerse in that, and to process it. That's what it looks like to me.
I fully agree. And when I wrote the book, it was written in pieces, because when it was suggested to me, listen, this binder that you just gave to all of us at this conference, this should be a book. And I said, absolutely not. I am not interested in being an author at all. But once I wrapped my brain around that, it was very easy to put it together, because I knew, number one, I still wasn't retaining a lot of information at once. So the chapters had to be very short and succinct and manageable. So each chapter really is just maybe 5 pages, and it's a quote about this particular tool, like S is sliding into exercise. So a short quote about exercise. Some people love quotes. Then it's maybe a page of my story. How did I use exercise as a healing tool while I was grieving and traumatized? Then there are also about 5 paragraphs from other people in the healing community: bereaved parents, bereaved spouses, friends, colleagues, people who have made their way through cancer and survived. How did these people use this particular healing tool? So it's really, how did the community use this tool? Then there are some single small action steps people can take. And then there's the why. I'm a big why person. Why does this help? What is it doing for my human physiology? So all of that is packed in there very simply. And a lot of folks who have the book, they just open it to any random chapter and just start there.
Yeah, this is so unique, I think. The simplicity of it is wonderful. As Helen has said already, it makes it very easy for the person who's grieving to just, open up a page, read it. It's not long to read. I mean, let's be honest. When people are grieving, reading some long diatribe is not going to be something they can process or even sit down and concentrate on for any length of time.
Yes.
So the simplicity of it is really going to be helpful. Now, you also have an online toolbox. Is it similar or different from the book?
It is similar. So the social worky part of me said, before I create a book and put this out in book form, I want people to have access to resources and tools that can help them. So I have a good friend who lives in Boston who's a web designer, and I said, Jack, can you please help me take this binder I've created and put all of these resources and tools and the why online on my first website. So I wanted to offer something free that people could access immediately, and that is the online toolbox. So if folks go to A2Z HealingToolbox.com, they can click on the online toolbox and 26 letters will appear. If they click on letter C, which is counseling, they'll get information about the why. Why does counseling or therapy help when we're going through a grief or trauma experience? And then there are resources they can click on and take them to different therapies, Here's the website for EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a wonderful trauma therapy. So that's the online toolbox. Of course, there is more information in the book. I couldn't put everything online, but there's enough there where people can start.
So I'm in the online toolbox and I'm looking, I just picked H just because, and it's higher power help. And I'm looking at why does it help? And then how does it promote healing? And then you've got different websites, audio and CD resources. And then it looks like you've got a lot of different books. And I love it that you've got one by a rabbi. You've got On Life After Death by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which is a huge death and dying resource. She was amazing. Looks like a big variety. Just a unique tool, but very easy to grab a hold of, which I think is super important. When you're grieving, your attention span's not so great.
Right. And I think the teacher part of me, when I was creating the book and the online toolbox, really wanted, right, we're all different. Different things will grab each of us because we're different humans, psychologically, emotionally, and behaviorally. So I wanted a variety of books and tools. And if we talk about letter H for a minute, which is higher power help, part of my process was talking to rabbis, talking to priests, talking to pastors, just moving around the community, asking these people why did my higher power, God, why did this happen? How could this be? I had to lose my faith and then over years rebuild it into something new. But there are books there, as you mentioned, by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who we all know and love. And then there's another book there too that was one of the first given to me. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but I just love it. And it's definitely got a Christian slant to it because the author, Jerry Sitzer, when he wrote the book, A Grace Disguised, How the Soul Grows Through Loss, he was a professor of theology in Washington State. And he and his mother and wife and their 4 children were all in a van coming back from a homeschooling event. And they were hit by a drunk driver. And so in one instance, his mother, his wife, and one of his children died. And so here's a theology professor who had to figure out how and why, and how did his higher power help play a part in this, or did it, or what does that look like now? So for those people who are questioning their spirituality, which is a very, very common thing to do in a grief or trauma experience, that's another wonderful book just to read how this theology professor came to terms with that.
I have not read or seen that book before, but you've definitely got my curiosity now. I want to get that and read it sometime. I have read Rabbi Harold Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's been around for a long time. I read it years ago and was just so impressed by his way of thinking about this. It was very good. So I really like this online toolbox. So if people want to get a taste of what the book is like, I guess they could go to this website that you have and take a look there. But you say there's actually more information in the book itself. So when did this book first come out?
This book was published in 2018, and Brent died in 2012. So I would say, someone has asked before, how long did it take you to write it? Did you just sit down and come up with all these things? No. The first bit was, okay, I'm incapacitated. My husband has died and was missing for 2 weeks. I didn't feel like I had any tools, but the tool that I had was I was already a social worker, and I had a son who was 5 who needed me. So that's why I got up in the morning. And I really just took a lot of time to move around the community, collect resources, talk to everyone I could who could possibly help us in our situation. And once the binder was put together, I had the meat of the book. And then after the meat came, well, the why, the why is it happening? Then the tools, then the resources, then collecting the stories from other people in the community. And then the quotes, everything came really piecemeal.
To stay healthy as a caregiver, you need healthy self-care. Whether you're a hospice professional or a family member providing care for someone who's seriously ill, it's important to take care of yourself, mind, body, and spirit. At theheartofhospice.com, you can find self-care resources under the Learn menu. These resources will help you maintain healthy habits and find new activities to add to your self-care regimen. Caregiving is challenging. We want you to stay healthy while you do it. Check out our tips for accountability partners, self-care when you're traveling, sleep hygiene, and creative ways to feed your spirit. Your end-of-life journey matters. You are the Heart of Hospice. Now back to today's episode. So your organization does workshops, right? For large and small groups both. What are the most common challenges you've seen that folks experience when it comes to managing grief during the season we're in, with the pandemic? Have you seen the face of grief change any?
Yes and no. So first, the no. I think in any grief experience, whether we're in a pandemic or not, there are certain common reactions that happen, as I mentioned, physically, spiritually, emotionally, behaviorally. So those are the same. And what I do first with people, do a lot of virtual work now, and I put up on the screen a list of all the grief reactions there could be, just to normalize. This is what you're sitting in now. And no, it doesn't feel good. But yes, this is it. This is normal grief. So that is a piece that remains the same. What has happened now is that with the pandemic, there's been more isolation. There's been people grieving alone who initially or before the pandemic wouldn't have had to grieve alone. There are people that I work with in the organization and the nonprofit I work with, and I'll talk about that later, Soaring Spirits International. We run a program specifically for people widowed by COVID. So that's another layer. Widowed people whose person died in the hospital, they couldn't see them. They weren't allowed in there. There's that lack of closure. Maybe you get 10 people that are allowed to come to a service for your person who has died versus 200 people that would have been at a celebration of life. There's a lot of layers of complication added to the already complicated grief experience.
Yeah, it seems to be happening more and more right now. We were hoping the pandemic would be over by now, but it's not. There seems to be a resurgence of infections out there, and we're seeing it happen more and more again with people who are unable to be with their loved ones when they're in the dying process. And it's hard. It's sad to see all this happening.
Yes.
And you're right. The grief is the same. I mean, grief emotions, the reactions to grief are the same, but I think the things that are causing grief are in flux. It's changing.
So, a weird component that I've seen for folks that have lost someone, there's a little bit of a pecking order. And I think this is good for bereavement professionals, social workers and chaplains that work in hospice to understand. So you lose a family member. What's the first question that people ask these days? Oh, was it COVID related?
Yeah.
So now there's a little bit of a hierarchy. It's more interesting or it's more of a loss if it's COVID related. But if it's your garden variety heart attack, maybe not so much. And I can see that influencing how we provide grief care, grief support, and bereavement in our industry.
Yes. And to your point, what I've seen with Soaring Spirits International, the nonprofit I work with that serves the global widowed community, is that even within the widowed community, right? You take a bunch of widowed people or a bunch of bereaved parents. And if your person has died from COVID or during the time of COVID, that's a little different than dying pre-COVID, right? Or not from COVID. And so we decided to make a special virtual program for the people who had a loss due to COVID. There are a lot of political factors that are involved now with this pandemic. And the widowed people that were sitting in the huge Zoom room with other widowed people, it was heartbreaking even more for them to hear about political arguments related to the pandemic that their person died from. So we said, okay, you know what? You guys need your own separate class. And so we created that for them.
Yeah, I can see how that would be very divisive and
Yes.
heighten the grief quite a bit.
Yes. And it's, grief is already so challenging. And then you add politics, you add a pandemic in general, you add people losing jobs, you add school kids who are maybe in school, maybe not. Maybe everyone's working at home. Maybe kids under 12 are still not vaccinated, so parents are worried about that. There's so many layers that have increased during this pandemic time for the people who are surviving the death.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, you've mentioned Soaring Spirits International, and I think our listeners are going to be really curious about that particular organization that you're working with. So how did Soaring Spirits begin? Your own experience, or was it how did it get started? Let me be quiet and let you tell.
I love telling the Soaring Spirits story, although I was not there at the beginning. So Michelle Neff Hernandez lives in Simi Valley. She is the CEO and founder of Soaring Spirits International. And her husband, Philip Hernandez, was out for a bike ride. They were both very athletic. He was killed when his bicycle was hit by a truck. And she was in her 30s and she had 3 children and she needed to find other young widowed people. And she didn't know where they were. And slowly over time, she collected a few and a few and a few. So Soaring Spirits was actually founded 13 years ago as a support network for widowed people who were younger, not so much 80s and 90s. However, we do have 80 and 90-year-olds that we serve now. So over the last 13 years, Soaring Spirits International has become a global umbrella that serves the widowed population. We've sent out, oh my gosh, hundreds of thousands of newly widowed packets. We have regional support groups all over the United States, Canada, and Ireland. We have an online platform called Widowed Village where people can come into Zoom calls and connect with each other about any type of loss. We have services for the LGBTQ community. We have a men's group for male widowers. It is a huge organization that I am very happy to be part of now as the programs and education manager.
One of the really cool things that you guys are doing at Soaring Spirits International is the Widowed Pen Pals program. I love the idea of writing the old-fashioned, get back to basics, old school stuff. I love that kind of connection.
Right.
I get the immediacy of being able to connect with somebody via an email or a video call, conference call, chat, things like that. But I love the idea of connecting. It does say email, but to be able to connect that way more personally, that's pretty cool.
Right. The Widowed Pen Pal program is the oldest program of Soaring Spirits. And then that was built on top of Widowed Village. And now we have one of probably the largest program is called Camp Widow. Camp Widow is a 3-day conference that is held annually in San Diego, in Tampa, and in Toronto. And picture a professional conference full of 400 widowed people who are choosing workshops on anything from cooking for one, grieving children, how to ask for support, what to do with your person's belongings, redating or repartnering. I mean, oh my gosh, the list goes on. And so Camp Widow has been running for a decade now. And we're in 3 different cities in 3 different countries. We just had a Camp Widow in Australia this year as well. And so it's just a wonderful place that you never want to wind up. But if you have to be there and you are widowed, it's a beautiful place to be surrounded by people who just get it and are able to talk with you about the experience of being a widowed person.
So if any of our listeners are interested in finding out more about Soaring Spirits, where can they go to find this information?
Well, soaringspirits.org is our main website, soaringspirits.org. From soaringspirits.org, you can offshoot to the campwidow.org website or the widowedvillage.org website. We also have a resiliency center housed at Schreiner University in Texas that a lot of research is coming out of there now as far as the widowed experience. And so I would say people should go to the soaringspirits.org main hub website, and from there they can look and click off into any of these other areas.
And for any of our listeners, we're going to have all of these links in our show notes, so you'll be able to go straight to them. And if you are a grief specialist, bereavement support person for a hospice agency, you'll be able to access and be able to provide these links, this resource to your families that you're working with. Okay, so we're going to put you on the spot.
Okay, go for it.
It's like the bonus question for the interview. And we've had a lot of changes in the last year and a half. You know, life is very full, as we were talking before we started the interview. A lot of changes, a lot of life stressors. So it's got to affect our self-care. We would love to hear, how has your self-care changed? How has it evolved for the better over the last year and a half or so?
I love that question. Actually, self-care is letter Y in the book. Y is your self-care, not the self-care of others, but yours. And so I'm a big proponent of making self-care a top priority, because with the thousands of widowed people I've worked with and even bereaved parents, if we're not okay, no one else in the house is okay. I know that if I'm not okay, my son's not going to be okay. So my self-care has always been a variety of things, which I do more of now in the last year and a half. Exercise for me has always been huge. That's letter S in the book, as I mentioned, slide into exercise. So my medicine, right, my medication and my meditation is all through exercise. I paddleboard, I swim, I walk, I hike, I bicycle. Anything outdoors, movement related is something that I have always done, but I've picked it up a notch in the last year and a half. When March of 2020 came along and the kids were all home from school and people went home to work, I was already working from home, but my son was here now in my space. And my office is on our 3rd floor, and our 2nd floor is where he was, right underneath me. And I set up a little office for him, and he put all of his books in the rails of the staircase, right? That was his locker, all the books there. And I said, okay, here's the structured part of me. Like, listen, this is going to be, we're going to do this because we know how to do hard things. And we are going to get up. You're going to make your bed. We're going to have breakfast, and we are going to go exercise before anything else. You can choose. You want to walk with me, hike with me, bike with me, swim with me, pick something, but we're going to do that, right, for our mental, physical sanity and health. And then I will work upstairs and you will get to your school stuff. And that is what we did for a year until he went back to school. So I'm in better shape now than ever.
That's awesome, though, creating that structure and then establishing those new, I won't say boundaries, but your new priorities. This is what we're going to do to make it fit the new normal. We've gotten to where we hate that expression, right? Everybody's got a new normal now.
Right.
But to be able to flex, I think that's the big lesson for your self-care.
Yes, being able to do that, and also being able to voice to anyone else in your house, I need a break. I need 10 minutes to go take a bath. I'm going to shut the door and go do that. Or I need to go for a walk with my girlfriend 6 feet apart outside. Like, I need that for me. So I think it's forced many of us to get really clear on what we actually need. And then it's a matter of going to get that. On
the website, your A to Z website, you have the self-care. We're looking at the why, your self-care. You have several books up here. Which one of those books do you think is, just for you, this is your opinion, which one of those books do you think was most helpful for you? I mean, you've got the invitation to self-care, the self-care for life, find joy, peace, serenity, vitality and sensuality, abundance and enlightenment. That's a long title. I like that one. So is there one in particular that you find would be helpful for people? Maybe that's something that, for you to tell our listeners, hey, check this one out.
Right. Well, I really like The Art of Extreme Self-Care by Cheryl Richardson. And the word extreme really fits the grief and trauma experience, because we are having an extreme experience. Mm-hmm. And then she chunks it out 1 month at a time. For those of us who are grieving or traumatized, like, I couldn't even think out a month. I couldn't even think to the end of the day, much less, well, here, do this for your entire life, right? Right. So I needed, small chunks. So that one spoke to me and still does. And really, I would say that people don't even need a book, right, for self-care. It's make a list of the things that you used to do as a kid. What did you love? Did you paint? Did you draw? Have you done any of the things that you used to enjoy in your former life? Maybe pick up a paintbrush. Maybe get back in that swimming pool. Maybe go find a tree to climb. I mean, it's really getting in touch with what fills us up. And I have letter Q in the book is quotes that inspire hope. And one of the quotes I have hung up in 2 places in my house is this: whatever's good for your soul, do that. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And for me, it's almost a daily check-in. What is good for my soul? Who is good for my soul? Where is good for my soul? And if folks need to make a list, right? Who are the people who are good for my soul? That's helping my self-care. Where are the places that help my soul? That is good for my self-care. What is it? What is it that is really going to help make someone feel even a smidgen, a little tiny piece of joy?
Yeah, so those 1% changes 1% moments. It makes a difference.
Yes.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Susan, thank you for being our guest today. Thank you for sharing all this information. And we know it will be very beneficial for our listeners to have the toolbox that you have. And we want to invite them, encourage them, recommend that they go and look up your A to Z toolbox, Healing Toolbox. We need to make sure we get that title correct. The A to Z Healing Toolbox. I like that title. So any last words that you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And as far as last words, I would just encourage people to find a community. I believe that we all heal in community, whether that community looks like some supportive friends or that community looks like a nonprofit organization for bereaved parents or bereaved siblings or bereaved spouses, or a virtual platform that maybe can provide some community. I think we all heal together. And this road and this life can be fun and enjoyable, but it can also be hard. And I think finding and surrounding ourselves with other people make it that much more enjoyable and joy-filled.
Absolutely. Good words to end with. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks so much.
So who knows better what a griever needs than someone who's actually been a griever in that type of situation, a widow?
Right. And we talked to Susan during the interview, or maybe after the interview. I can't remember when it was we talked with her.
Or it was before the interview.
Yeah, it could have been before, because we had such a good time just chatting with her. We talked about how she has taken this experience that she's been through, a grief, a trauma event, and made meaning out of it by helping others through it.
Yes. Very similar to David Kessler's story.
That's right.
Right. He lost his son, and he has created such meaning and shared that. And that's what strikes me so much about Susan, not just her story and how profound the life lessons learned were, but that she's willing to take all of that experience, such a hard thing, such a tough thing to go through, craft a new resilience from that, and then share it with people. Because I'm sorry, if I go through something traumatic and really hard, it's the ugly cry, and I don't get out of bed for 5 days, and probably not to talk too much about that, not brush my hair, the depression and things that go with that. I don't know that I would be vulnerable enough to share all of that. She's very open.
Yeah, and she went through some of those things, and she said the only reason she got out of bed was because she had a son to take care of.
She had her son to help.
Right.
So she does have an amazing story. So we hope that if you are a griever, if you are a widow or widower, or you are an end-of-life professional, end-of-life care professional, and you are dealing with people who are bereaved, we hope that you'll check out her website, A2, HealingToolbox.com. You can find her book there, purchase it, see the online toolbox that she's got, which is free. We talked about that in depth. You can find her book there, A to Z Healing Toolbox, a practical guide for navigating grief and trauma with intention. It's amazing, amazing. You can read Susan's story, see the testimonials, and you can also connect with Soaring Spirits International.
Right. I was going to make sure we mention that, because Soaring Spirits International is a great resource for widows or widowers who are just needing to connect with other people who understand what they're going through. And I keep using the phrase amazing, but it's amazing. It's an incredible resource that can help people who are in that particular category. And there's a lot of them out there, and they need the connection. They need that community, that village to lean on and to be a resource for others as well.
So if you're interested in Soaring Spirits International, you can find it at soaringspirits.org.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Fenter here with Helen Bauer. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.